Hi, fifth graders. Today's topics are properties of multiplication, estimating products, and then we're going to practice with some multiplication. So we're going to start off with the properties of multiplication. First, let's look on the left side before we look at the worksheet. We see that we see my kind of like definitions of them. So in this worksheet, it gives us four properties of multiplication. The first one is distributive, which is when like the parentheses move around in this particular worksheet. And then the zero property is when everything times, it's basically meaning that everything, like any number times zero, is going to always equal zero. And the commutative property is when just the numbers move around. So the difference between distributive and commutative is that commutative, when the numbers move around, it doesn't change the answer. But for distributive, the parentheses move around, so it's going to change the answer, and you're not going to, in most cases, it will change the answer. And then identity property is when any number times 1 is always equal to the same number. So let's get started on the worksheet now. We're going to do number 3 together. Number 3 gives us 28 times 33 times 61 equals 28 times 33 times 61. So in this case, the numbers did not move around, right? They stay the same. But the parentheses moves around, right? As we can see in this left part, it was for 28 and 33, but on the right part, it changed to 33 times 61. So we're going to say that this particular, for this particular answer, it's going to be distributive. Because once again, the numbers did not move around, only the parentheses did. Now we're going to move on to number 4. It gives us 2 times 0 equals 0. So once again, when we look here, we see that the zero property, or let's start from the top, like distributive, and when parentheses move. And in 4, we don't see any parentheses. So we can automatically just cross out the distributive, right? And then we move on to zero property. Everything times 0 equals 0. Let's see here. 2 times 0 equals 0. There it is. So that's why we say that zero property is our answer. And if you want to see why the other ones aren't, it's like commutative property when the numbers move. The numbers did not move, so it cannot be commutative. As for identity, it doesn't give us the number. Like if it was identity property, then it would, if 2 times 0 would have given us 2, but in this case it did not, it gave us 0. So it's not identity either. So that's why it's zero property. Now we're going to move on to estimating products. So it says on the directions, estimate the product, round each factor to the nearest 10 for numbers 1 through 5. And then for numbers 6 through 10, I think that's typo. 10, I think it's 6 to 10. It says to round to the nearest 100. And the example that I'm going to do with you, number 4, is within the range of 1 through 5. So we're going to round each factor to the nearest 10. So there's 2 ways to do this. You can either do rounding at the very end or rounding at the very beginning. So I'll show you both ways. So the first way would be rounding at the very beginning. So we see, I'm going to repeat my rules to you that I always give. You round up when the number is 5 or greater. You round down if the number is less than 5. So you always need to remember this. And keeping that in mind, let's move on. Let's go back to number 4. So we see the first number is 17, right? And in order to round this, we have to look at the number behind it because it wants us to round it to the nearest tenths. So we're going to look at 7, and we see that 7 is greater than 5, so we're going to round up. So we are going to give 1 more to the 1, which goes to 2, and then the 7 just turns into a 0. Now we'll move on to the second number, which is 72. Once again, we need to round to the nearest tenth. So we look at the number 2, and we round And we see that 2 is less than 5, so we're going to round down. And when you're rounding down, it just means that 7 just stays as 7. But the 2 turns into a 0, which is why it's like rounding down, because when you're rounding down, the number may stay the same, but in total it will be less than the given number. Now that we have 20 and 70, now we're going to multiply. So let's start with the ones place first. 0 times 0 is just 0. 0 times 2 is just 0 again. And then we put the placeholder. And we do 7 times 0, which is 0. And then 7 times 2 is 14, so we're just going to bring down 14 because there's no other number in front. And then we just add, and we get 1400. And then the other way would be to round it at the very end. So let's try that way. You get 17 times 72. Oh wait, actually you can't, because in this case it says it wants us to round each factor. So the only way to do it is by rounding the given factors right here. I missed the keyword, each factor. So given that, our final answer would be 1400. Sorry for the confusion. Now we're going to move on to multiplying 2 digit by 2 digits. So this is basically just multiplication. We're going to do number 6 together. We're going to do 29 times 64. Multiplication is fairly simple, but the place where a lot of people get wrong is when they're adding, they don't match up all the numbers, so they get confused when adding them all up, especially with big numbers. So you have to be careful when you're multiplying. You must align all the numbers. So let's start with the ones place. We do 9 times 4, which is 36. So we're going to bring down the 6, and then we'll bring up the 3. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 plus 3 is 11. So we're going to bring down 11 because, once again, we can't do it to the 6, or there's no number in front of the 2 either. And then we put the plus sign, bring down the place value of 0, and then we do 6 times 9 right away, which is 54. So we're going to bring down the 4, but bring up the 5. And for now, just disregard the 3. We do 6 times 2, which is 12. 12 plus 5, which is 17. So I'm going to put 1 here, and I'm going to put the 7 under the 1. You could put a 0 here too. It doesn't really matter though. And as we see that all my numbers are lined up, so I'm just going to add them. 6 times 0 is just 6. 6 plus 0 is just 6. 1 plus 4 is 5. 1 plus 7 is 8. And 1 plus 0 is just 1. So our final answer would be 1,856. And that's it. So when you're multiplying, just make sure you put this placeholder and that you add correctly. Now we're going to be multiplying 2 digits by 3 digits. And we're going to do number 1 together. It gives us 250 times 81. When you're doing multiplication, it's easier if you put number with the most digits on top. And in this case, 250 has more digits, so we're going to put 250 on top. And then you're going to multiply by 81. So like we did in the previous slide, we're going to just start off with the ones. So we do 1 times 0, which is 0. 1 times 5, which is 5. 2 times 1, which is 2. And then when we're done with the ones, we're going to move on to the tens. But once again, we need to put a placeholder of 0 first. Now we multiply. 8 times 0 is 0. 8 times 5 is 40. We're going to bring down the 0, but bring up the 4. 8 times 2 is 16. 16 plus 4 is 20. And then we're going to add. 0 plus 0 is just 0. 5 plus 0 is 5. 2 plus 0 is 2. 0 plus 0 is just 0. And 2 plus 0 is just 2. So our final answer would be 20,250. And that's all I have for you guys today. I hope this video helped you guys